Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and because I didn't know what I was going to do tonight and I said, hey, I need to do an informative video today, I threw up a little questionnaire on the fan page to let people pick the topic, and I scanned through there, saw one, said, hey, that's a good question. Something some other people have asked based upon something I said the other day, so let's jump into it a little bit. Someone asked me, can you use EMG studies to determine if something is a good exercise? And the answer is yes and no. It depends on how you use the tool. An EMG study can give you a very loose idea of how much muscle activation happens in a given muscle. However, it is not very precise. It gives you a very loose ballpark. And what I mean is, I'm going to list 3 exercises for you guys, and let's talk about, say, this lateral head of the bicep, the outer head of the bicep. We could slap a couple sensors on there, and we could do 3 different exercises, and I can tell you very easily, just based upon anatomy, about how they're going to register. We could take a rear delt fly for your rear delts. We could take a heavy deadlift, and we could take a barbell curl, or a dumbbell curl, or a chin up for the 3rd exercise. And here's how they're going to read. The rear delt fly is going to read on the EMG that it is almost non-existent. Why? Because the bicep, you might tense the bicep a little bit while you're doing that, because other muscles get tense. Your abs even get tensed a little bit doing a rear delt fly. It's impossible to isolate a muscle, completely impossible. But it's not a primary mover in any way. It's not a stabilizer. It doesn't get any stretch, doesn't get any compression. Nothing happens to the muscle directly. So it's going to have a very, very tiny amount of activation. On a deadlift, you're going to get some activation because it's pulling on it. And if you're doing really, really heavy deadlifts, like, 500, 600 pounds, it's going to put a lot of tension, stretching tension on the bicep. Even because the arm is locked out under weight, there's going to be some tension there. In fact, it's enough to stimulate a little bit of growth. If you don't train at all and you just started training and you do nothing but deadlifts, your biceps will get bigger. They're not going to get anywhere near as big as if you did curls also, but they're going to get just a little bit bigger. It will stimulate some growth. The EMG will show some stimulation. It'll show a lot more stimulation than the rear delt fly, but it's not going to be a high degree of stimulation. It's going to be at a low level. And then all those other exercises I listed are going to show at a high level. So you could conclude based upon that the rear delt fly is a terrible exercise for the biceps, that the deadlift is an okay exercise for the biceps, and that all those types of curls and chin-ups are really good exercises for that head of the bicep. And that's what the EMG study would be able to tell you if you weren't able to use basic anatomy to figure it out on your own. Now, sometimes it's more complex muscles, things like the latissimus dorsi, for example, the main part of the back. Basic anatomy may not reveal enough. So that's where the studies can become somewhat helpful. The problem is that when people try to compare different exercises that all have a good degree of stimulation and actually make claims like this exercise is better, that's when you run into problems. And here's the biggest problem we run into immediately. First of all, you can't get an accurate reading off these sensors, because let's take the bicep. Now, my biceps aren't massive by any means, but there's a good chunk of muscle there. It's far larger than 2 or 3 sensors could cover. There's several inches of meat down through there. At least 3 inches of meat between here, where my fingertip is, and the bone under it. Those sensors on an EMG study don't have the ability to read that deep into the muscle tissue. It's just that it goes in a very small distance, way, way less than an inch. It's a fraction of an inch. So all you can do is slap a couple of sensors and determine how much activity is going on through the skin. So that's going to make it slightly less accurate, just at the surface area on that head of the muscle. You don't know what's going on deep inside the muscle, or particularly the underlying region, how much activity is going on there. The only way you could do that would be to put in even a muscle the size of a bicep, a smaller muscle, 9 or 10 biopsy needles inside the muscle, a good couple inches deep into that muscle, at least 10 of them, and then put EMG sensors on that. That could really give you an accurate reading. Then you could really pin down and say that the concentration curl is 1 or 2% more effective than the weighted chin-up. We don't do that. That's unethical. That level of technology can't tell you that. And we're not going to put 10 biopsy needles in someone's bicep and have them do 20 different exercises. Now, the next issue we run into is that even if you're that accurate, the problem is the execution of the movements will affect the reading. And me, for example, as a power lifter, someone who really knows a lot about controlling bar speeds, muscle activation, things like that, I could take the same exercise with the same amount of weight on it, and I could give you 10 different EMG readings just by changing the way I execute the movement, how fast I accelerate the bar, what bar path I use to activate different muscles at a higher priority. It's going to give you different readings. So the problem you run into is that we not only do we have limited surface area, we have different bar speeds, different techniques, different weights being used that are going to get different readings. And here's the thing. The more skilled that you are at a given lift, meaning the neural efficiency, meaning you've strength trained heavy with that lift, you've practiced the motor skills a lot, the higher you're going to be able to ping those numbers if you really try on an EMG on that exercise than you will on an exercise that you don't train very often, even though someone else who trains that one more often may get a better reading. So you could take 3 different people, and even if it was accurate, because of their relative strengths, because of their motor skills and how well they execute that given lift, each of those 3 people would get a different lift as being the best one for the muscle activation on the EMG. Not because the lift is superior, but because they are personally superior at using that lift as a skill that they've learned. So the reality becomes when people try to use these EMG studies, actually pick exercises beyond saying, is this a good or a bad exercise, is really useless. It can tell you if it's a good or a bad exercise. It can't tell you more than that with the level of technology there due to, 1, the limited ability to get accurate readings through the whole muscle. And remember, an exercise recruits different amounts of motor units, even half an inch apart in different parts of the muscle. So if you just miss that sensor from the ideal spot to read for that particular thing, or in a better spot that gives a higher reading than it should versus the overall muscle by just a half inch, it's going to change everything. But then it comes down to the issue of the neural efficiency, skills involved, and the technique used by the lifter in question on that exercise can tremendously affect the reading. So no, it is simply not a good tool for that. Alright guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it has been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time. But let me give you guys a bicep shot before I go. Oh, Mount Bicepius.